me that was true. We never have trucks that give us fits. Never have mud to deal with. Nothing like that. Trees always fall exactly where you put the cut, right?
Always.
Yeah, always. They never go the wrong direction. They've never landed on somebody's garage or house or anything drastic like that. The architects never change the plans. Yeah. Kids, all our kids in our church are all perfect. At least you kids ought to be nodding your head. Well, yeah, of course that's true. Yeah. Parents are going, never. I got two problems with that statement. One is I remember when I was a kid. And now that I've raised some kids, there's zero truth to that statement. But some are better than others. But anyway. The challenge for us is why are we who we are? And I'm still wrestling with this idea out of 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. What is our identity? Who are we? And how does that shape who we're supposed to be? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this first part, but we are going to look more in depth at the second part. Last week I kind of had a major change up in my point of my message, and we ended up going a slightly different direction. I just use this as the bouncing off point. Today I want to address what's actually here, much more specifically. So verse 9 of the second chapter, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may, and this is where we're going to pick up with what this should cause in our life, that you may proclaim the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Reading on through verse 10, we'll go down and read down through to verse 12, but you may or may not get that far today. He calls us out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as a sojourner and a pilgrim, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of the visitation. And so here's about our testimony. Now this is the same, in many respects, the same thing we were talking about in our Sunday school Bible study time. It's saying very similar things, but it's a contrast to it as well, because Paul was making the case in Corinthians that it doesn't matter what you think about me, it matters what God thinks about me. It doesn't matter what you say you know about me, what matters is what God knows is really in my heart. And if we don't get that right, we're going to mess up. But Peter here is saying there should be an outward working of our lives that goes out into the world in which we live, right? We'll get to, or Jack will get there in Ephesians, and we are in Corinthians. I've got Colossians, Ephesians, and Corinthians all mixed up here. Bear with me. But we'll get there in Corinthians when we get up to the time of the observance of communion, that whole idea of let a man examine himself. The challenge for us is we have to, at some level, we have to become self-aware. We need to know who we are, what we're like. And the old Rabbi Burns poem was to a louse, or to a little lice. Anybody here like to have lice? If any, I won't ask who's had them, because I think every one of my kids had them. Ruth and I have had them. It's just part of living in Scotland, so we just lived with them. And they were everywhere. And the cleaner you kept your hair, the more likely you were to get lice, as weird as that sounds. But the point of it was, they're little itty-bitty creatures, and they lay these eggs on your head, on your hair strands, and then they hatch, and then your head goes to itching. I want to scratch right now like crazy just talking about them. And so Rabbi Burns, Robert Burns, the great Scottish poet, he had this To a Louse. And it was a poem about the church lady that he was standing behind in church, and she was all in her fine clothes, and she had her hair all done up right, had her nice little bonnet on top, everything was good. And he's looking, and he sees this little louse crawling up her hair. And he said, thinking to himself, now do I tell her about it? Do I make an issue out of it? Do I ignore it? What do I do about it? So he wrote a poem about it and immortalized it. But the end line of it, the key thought of it all is, oh, that we could see ourselves as others see us. Because she was completely unaware that she had this little critter crawling in her hair. And how often is that so true of us as Christians, that we're not aware of what's crawling around on us, that people around us see that we don't see, and the impact that that has on people's lives. Because as Christians, we are to be something totally different, aren't we? We don't get the luxury of me having a bad attitude because some idiot cuts me off in traffic. I can't give them the Hawaiian good luck sign, right? I've got to just wave and smile. You idiot. Say it in such a way that they don't realize that's what I just called them, right? Now, you guys have been there, done that. And your issue may not be road rage, okay, but you know what your issue is, right? You know what gets you all worked up and you just want to, Argh! And sometimes we just got to submit that and say, God, for the sake of my testimony, for the sake of what people see, I will not do X, Y, Z anymore. And Father, when I'm tempted to do that, call out my spirit in time so that I don't. Once in a while, my flesh overrides my spiritual side. You guys have been there, you've done that. This is not, I'm not unique in this. Ruth and I have been reading, what's the name of that cartoon we're reading all the time? I forget what it's even called. Do you remember what it's called? I don't even know what it's called, but it's about this old guy and his wife, and it's always the grandkids. I don't know, do they have kids? But there's always these little grandkids running around. What is it?
Yeah, it's
anyway, pickle, is that what it is?
It's called pickles.
Pickles or something like that. It's a goofy thing. Ruth and I are sending them back and forth to each other all the time. I don't know how we got on it. We get these cartoons and we send it back. Boy, that looks just like us. and the reality is there's so much of that in the world. And she says, I'm not sure if this is good or bad. I said, I think it's actually good because it means we are on the spectrum of normal, right? When you start identifying with certain things, you kind of go, is that normal? Is that abnormal? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And I'm thinking, well, maybe this is not the worst thing in the world. So what does the world see in us? Do they see us for who we are? And who we are is we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people. We are chosen by God. We are called out by God. God says, I will enable you to do this. We often quote Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace are you saved through faith, that not of yourselves, it's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. But then we skip verse 10, and I really should memorize verse 10, rather than just have the principle of it in my head. But I'm going to give you the principle because I don't have it properly memorized today. But the point of it is, he says, for you are created to be His workmanship. In other words, now that you have salvation, you are created for a purpose. The simplistic answer is what we say, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That is the simplistic answer for us. But what does that look like? And we will always have to revisit and bring this, and this. And suddenly we've got a big, huge file folder that says, this is what it looks like to glorify God. And then we have to answer, am I filling these pages? Now, here's the thing. Our first page that we put in that file may be there for quite a while. You may only have one thing in your file that says, this is how I glorify God. But as we grow in Christ, as we get to know who Christ is, our file is going to get thicker because we're going to learn new things, new ways, new abilities to glorify God for who He is. So our learning in that is not just one thing or even two things. It may be a dozen things. It may be 3 dozen things. And the older we get, the more mature in Christ, the more we know of who Christ is, the more things we will be able to do that will glorify God by intent. Sometimes we do things that glorify God by accident. Is that a good thing? Yes! Sometimes it's always good to do good even if it's by accident. Sometimes the reality is sometimes we find out we should do this and we have to, what's the term, Paul, that we were using? Fake it till you make it, right? My heart intent knows this is what I should do, and I know it intellectually, I know it in my heart that this is the right action, but my motivation to do this is not always very good. And so we have to sometimes do what's right just because it's right. But then prayerfully, our motivation changes, and as our motivation changes, because of who we are, it changes everything about what motivates us to do what we do. Out of that, then, Peter here says, here's what happens. Because you are this, because you are this special people, because you are chosen, because you are a royal priesthood, you're not just an average duff on the bottom of the scale. You are royalty. You are a child of God. Because of this, he says, this is what's supposed to happen. That you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Now here's the thing. We talk about, what did Jesus say? He said, I am come that you might have life and that you might just have a mediocre life just getting by. Is that what He said? Come on, you know this text as well as I do. He said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it abundantly. I don't want you to just have a mediocre life. Now, does that mean He's going to take away all our suffering, all our pain, all of our lacks, all of our... No, He's going to promise, He's promised to supply our needs. He just doesn't, as the saying goes, He promised to supply our needs, not always our greeds, right? But He's promised to supply our needs. So we won't worry about that. We've got to trust that if He doesn't give it to us, it probably means we don't need it, at least right then, right? But the point of it is He gives us what we need because He knows what we need. And so He says, I will give you these things, and out of this, I will give you this abundant life, not this free of sorrow, not this free of heartache, not this free of pain, not this free of suffering, but I will make it so that you go through it abundantly. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Our joy comes from within. Our joy comes from our relationship with Christ. Our happiness is determined by our outward circumstances. If we fall and break something, or if we're in pain, we don't go, oh yay, give me more. Well, you may, but I don't. When I'm hurting, I'm saying, give me whatever it takes to take this pain away so my body can heal, hopefully, and I get past this pain, right? That's the way we think. Sometimes we just got to say, okay. Guy goes to the doctor, he says, when I do this, it hurts. Every time I do this, it hurts. What do I do, Doc? Doc says, stop doing this, right? Sometimes that's the answer. But the reality is, we get an abundant life, a life that can be filled with joy. Not our joy, but His joy. That's what our identity says. And so He says, listen, the same way, He says, as I promise you abundant life, I also want you to know that the light that comes within you is marvelous. It's not, I really thought about it yesterday as I was working through this. I thought, I really need to get all the lights out in here and get this really super bright torch in here and blind y'all, right? Okay, so pretend I did that. But I'm nicer than that, so I'm not going to do that. But the reality, that's what it should be. It should be a marvelous light, a bright light, a light that just shines beyond what we can imagine. Our lives changed enough that the light of Christ within us shines out through us. going, oh well, I'm a Christian. I prayed a magic prayer many years ago. I even went and got baptized. I got a friend of mine that his claim to salvation is, I was baptized in a Southern Baptist church back in 1803 or whatever. I don't know, it's forever ago. And that's his claim. And when I try and pinpoint him and nail him down and say, buddy, but when did you get a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? Well, I was baptized in the Baptist church and where he came from. And I'm going, that's not what I'm asking you. But I'm going to keep asking this guy that, and I'm going to keep asking him that until I get a straight answer out of him. I'm going to drive him crazy. He's going to quit calling me up and saying, man, I'm glad you're my friend. He's going to call up and say, never bother me again. No, I'm hoping the day will come when he'll say, you know, you keep talking about Christ being personal. What do you mean by that? Tell me how that changes my life. That's my prayer, that conversation will get there. But do we have such a light within us that it shines out, that we can get in people's faces at times and say, what about? Where is Christ in your life? Does he really matter? Has he really changed you? Are you this? Are you chosen, a part of a chosen generation by God? Are you a royal priest in the army of God? Are you part of a holy nation? Are you God's special people, God's set-aside people? Is that where you are? If so, what are you doing about it? And Peter says we should proclaim it. And so, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to serve. We're supposed to be ready to do these things. We are supposed to pray for each other. I'm reminded in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 to 17. I'm not going to look it up, but he talks there about the armor of God. He said, listen, this battle we're fighting, he said, this is not a physical battle. You don't actually get out your swords and your cannons and your whatever. He says, this is a spiritual battle, but you've got, if you're going to fight a spiritual battle, you have to put on the whole armor of God. So once you've got that armor on, I love it, because he says you will be able to stand. Here's the beauty of the Christian battle. Here's the beauty of the Christian journey. We are not called to charge the gates of hell. Think about this. We put on the armor so that we can stand. We can be a barrier. We can be a wall that the world has to fight against. Why? Doesn't mean we're not going to go into an actual battle. Doesn't mean we're not going to actually have to fight against the principalities and powers of the air. It means that we are ready to do whatever it takes, but it's not our battle. This is a battle between God and Satan. We'll look at that here in just a little bit. But the point of it is we're there to be able to stand against the armor, the attacks of Satan. We have a shield that quenches all the fiery darts that come heading our way. Those are those doubts. Those are those fears. Those are those times when you say, I know I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And Satan's niggling away at the back of your head going, are you sure? You remember when you did. You ever had that happen? Oh, I remember when I did X, Y, Z. And as I did X, Y, Z, that wasn't very God-honoring. That wasn't pleasing to my Lord and Savior, right? And that eats away at your insides. Been there, done that? That's why we got to have that shield that quenches those fiery darts. But at the end of it, he says, and Paul says, and praying with all prayers and supplications. For what purpose? That I may make known Jesus Christ. And so that's what he's talking about here. That's what Peter as well is saying. That you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness. Without Christ, who are we? We are nothing. We're wasting our lives. We're not living up to, nor capable of living up to the purposes that God has for us. But as chosen, as royal, as priestly part of the holy nation, we are a people that God has chosen, justified, and in the process of being sanctified. We know what sanctification is. Justified is just as if I had never sinned. That's our salvation moment. We will spend the rest of our life being sanctified. That means made holy, set apart, becoming more Christ-like. We'll spend the rest of our life being sanctified for His purposes. And in that process, we are to proclaim His praises. John, as I said earlier, he talks about us having an abundant life. He calls us out of darkness into life. Like life, abundant life, the light is not merely a light, it is enlightenment, it's revelation, but this is a marvelous light. We think about oceans. Some of you have been on the ocean. Some of you have been on big boats, or some kind of boats, right? The beauty of the ocean is it is always calm and flat. And yet, if you're in a sailboat, there's just enough wind to get you to where you want to go perfectly, right? Is that the reality? Absolutely not. There's storms, there's dark nights, there are times in our life that the ocean is cloud covered, it's dark, you can't see a thing. It's been interesting here in this area, and I'm thinking back to the fall before we actually had snow. When it got dark, didn't it? I don't know what the snow do. The snow, it seems like it adds light. It's like it glows almost sometimes. Coming home from somewhere the other night, and there was all this fresh falling snow, and I'm thinking, I can almost see it. I'm looking, the clouds are up there, and it's no moon. But it's still bright. The glow of lights everywhere just reflects and refracts through it, and you're going, wow, it's brighter out here than I believe. But before the snow fell, there were a few nights it was dark out, and I'm thinking, man, I wish the headlights on my truck would work a little bit brighter than they do. And then I go, well, that idiot that's coming towards me that doesn't turn his high beams off. Oh, he doesn't have his high beams on, because I flash him and he flashes his, and I'm going, whoa, and I thought, your other lights were bright, right? And I'm going, I wish I had his lights, but it's sometimes dark out. But on the ocean, on a cloudy, stormy night, it gets really dark. We learned that in Scotland. It was the nights when the clouds would be just settled in, it got dark early. It got dark even before sunset. But it was dark, and when it got really dark, it got really dark. Well, out there off of Arbroath, there's a lighthouse that has been built. It's called Bell Rock Lighthouse. You can look it up. It's a really fascinating history. I'm not going to go into all of it this morning. But these lighthouses matter. They're important, aren't they? They make a difference. The bad joke is the guy first of all, about the lighthouses was the U.S. naval ship and the Canadian authorities had it in Newfoundland. This is an urban myth, so it's not really true. They've done the research to find out, but it makes a great story, all right? So the transcript of the radio conversation was this. The American ship says, please divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. The Canadian guy comes back, recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. American goes, this is the captain of a U.S. Navy ship. I say again, divert your course. The Canadian then says, no, I say again, you divert your course. American says, this is the aircraft carrier USS Lincoln, the second largest ship in the United States Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north. That's 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this ship. The Canadian comes back with, I'm a lighthouse. Your call. Right? You've all heard that one, right? Yeah? Yeah. If you haven't, you haven't now badly told, I get it. But still, the point is, sometimes lighthouses serve a purpose, right? And so, I go to Arbroath, and you're standing on the shore there. And as you're standing on the shore, you look 11 miles out into the North Sea. And you see on the horizon a little tiny stick. Looks about this big, sticking up out of the water. And you think, that's not very big for a lighthouse. until you realize it's 11 miles away. So out there, it's called Bell Rock Lighthouse because there's this rock that for 4 hours a day is exposed at low tide. The high tide comes in and it's covered underwater. So they had some serious issues, and the average was there were about 6 or 8 vessels a year would hit this rock and crash and sink right there. So there's all kinds of shipwrecks in that area. And it's really kind of unknown how many are actually there. But they estimate that in the 1800s it was about 6 per year that hit that rock. Even though they knew it was there, they would hit that rock and they would sink. So the local priest there in Arbroath, he says, we've got to stop this death and carnage that's taking place because all these sailors are dying out there. So he made a float, put a bell on it, and anchored it to this rock. Now there's several stories about how the bell disappeared, whether it was a big storm came up, pole broke the chain, broke the whole thing sank, or whether it was actually stolen by the Danish pirates, who knows. But the point is, it got its name, Bell Rock, and they would periodically, they would replace the bell and so on and so forth. Well, this was not quite good enough because the ships were still crashing. So they asked, in 1807, they asked Robert Stevenson, not Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, but Robert Stevenson, the engineer, said, can you figure out a lighthouse for us? Because we need to do something out there. So there were 4 hours, as I say, of clear time where the rock was visible, and the rest of the time it was underwater. So they had 4 hours a day to work on this thing. I won't go into all the logistics of it, but if you go to Arbroath, go to the Lighthouse Museum there, there's a big circle that is the same size as the base of the lighthouse, 11 miles offshore. And they have a pattern in there where they did almost like jigsaw puzzle pieces to lock these big, heavy pieces of granite together. And each one of these was hand-carved there at this, where the museum is now. It was a factory to make these pieces of granite. They hauled all this granite in, carved it out, hauled it out there. They had a crew of guys out on the rock that for 4 hours a day, they would chip down into and take pickaxes, and slowly but surely, they dug out this big circle. And when they were ready, they brought this first layer of pieces in and got them all laid into place. 2,500 pieces of granite later, they have a lighthouse that is 118 foot tall. And it's built in such a way that now, 200 plus years later, this lighthouse is still functioning. I mean, talk about a feat of engineering to build this thing, and you see some of the pictures and hear some of the stories. As I say, oceans are calm, right? Not hardly. The North Sea, even though it's not very big in the overall context of big ocean bodies, it comes crashing in, and the waves sometimes are 30, 40 feet tall. They have been known, the lighthouse keeper has testified, that there were times the waves came in so hard, so tall, that they were crashing against the glass where the light was shining out. 118 feet tall in the air. So it's not actually very calm. So if you're on a ship in that kind of water, what are you hoping for? You're hoping for something to mark out the danger of life, right? And so this light will flash. I don't know what you know about lighthouses, but lighthouses are all painted in unique stripes, whether they're angled one way or another. And so during the daytime, you can look at the lighthouse, you can tell where you are based on what the pattern on the lighthouse is. This is such and such a lighthouse, this is a different lighthouse, and that's the pattern all around the world for lighthouses. The other thing is the blink schedule is always different. Every lighthouse, you can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or it might be 1, 2, pause, 1, 1, 2, pause. And every lighthouse is different. And you'll know if you're doing the navigation, you know by the blink status what that lighthouse you're looking at. And hopefully you know kind of where you are. But you know if there's a lighthouse there, back off, because there's danger in that place. may mark, you may know where, once you get past this lighthouse, you can turn into the channel and you're safe. But if you turn too soon, you're going to crash, you're going to burn, you're going to sink. And so it is, they made this lighthouse there. And here's the challenge for us. If we take on board what Peter's talking about here, he said, you are to proclaim the marvelous light of Jesus Christ. That's our task. I kind of played with it, so I'm going to throw both of them out at you and leave it for you to kind of decipher what works best for you. Because we can compare ourselves to the lighthouse because we are the light bearers, right? Jesus Christ is the light. Or we can say Jesus Christ is the lighthouse because he's the firm foundation. And we shine out into the world. I'll let you use whichever one you resonate with most, because I think as I was working through that, I thought, they both actually work. There's no perfect illustrations, but the point of it is that we are to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. So whether we are the lighthouse shining out into a dark world, or whether we are stationed firmly fixed in the foundation of Jesus Christ and we are shining out, the case is still made, I think. All right, so I'm just throwing those out so you know I did process this, and neither one's perfect, but they both work. But it makes me think of that song that says, there is a lighthouse on the hillside that overlooks life's sea. When I'm tossed, it sends out a light that I might see. And the light that shines in darkness now will safely lead me home. If it wasn't for the lighthouse, my ship would sail no more. And the chorus is, and I thank God for the lighthouse. I owe my life to him. Jesus is the lighthouse, and from the rocks of sin, he has shown the light around me so that I might clearly see. If it wasn't for the lighthouse, where would this ship be? The last verse is this. It says, everyone that lives around us says, tear that old lighthouse down. The big ships don't sail this way anymore. Ain't no use for it standing around. But then my mind goes back to that stormy night when just in time I saw the light. With the light from that old lighthouse that stands there on a hill. And so Christ, for me, is the lighthouse. And I get that, as like I say, you can look at it both ways. But that's a reminder to us that Christ is the only answer. Our world is saying there is no God. We don't need God. We can do whatever we want to do. We can live however we want to live. We can identify however we want to identify. We can do anything we want. YOLO, you only live once. Just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Right? Is that not the world we live in? If you don't realize that's the world we live in, you need to start talking to other people a lot more. I think I've said it before. Again, I'll remind, I don't know, I tell the same stories everywhere I go, and I tell them over and over because they still hit me. So you can ignore it if you want. But the point of it was, I remember sitting in our church in Waxahachie, Texas. We had Friend Day. Invite a friend to church! And I'm looking around and I'm saying, you know what? All my friends are in church. All my friends are pretty good people. All my friends are, best I know, on their way to heaven. I don't have any friends to invite to Friend Day. And God used that to rock my world. Because I had to get out there and make some more friends. And then I started finding out what people without Christ live like. What they talk like. What was part of their life. And I had to realize I have to change my life so that they see Christ in me. If it wasn't for that lighthouse, where would my ship be? But if we are not the lighthouse, where will their ship be? Now, I'm just going to introduce next week for us, all right? So we're going to read 10, 11, and 12 again. Who once were not a people. This is the part we've got to understand. We have not always been part of the kingdom of God. Most of our world these days is no longer part of the kingdom of God. We once were not a people, but now we are a people of God. Who had not obtained mercy, but now we have obtained mercy. We're going to talk about mercy next week. Because we have to understand mercy. First of all, we have to understand how the mercy of God works in our life. So that we can understand how the mercy of God works in the lives of other people. Because if we don't understand mercy, we're never going to be able to communicate it to anybody else. We have obtained mercy. Beloved, I beg you. Peter's not casual in this. He's not saying, well, if you can find the time to fit this in. No, he says, I beg you. I plead with you. As Paul said it in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, I beseech you. That's the word that's there. I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, that reminder that this world is not my home. I'm just passing through. He said, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. I have to stomp on Jack a little bit when we get to that verse, because we're going to get there, because Paul says some of these fleshly lusts are against your own bodies. We've got to deal with them. Having your conduct, your manner of living, may your conduct be honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you. Now keep in mind, Peter's writing to people that have been scattered from Jerusalem, but he's also speaking to people that are Gentiles. They're not Jewish. So he's saying, listen, you're neither Jew nor Gentile. You are a Christian. You are a believer. This makes you unique. He said, you are Gentiles. What he's saying in verse 9, you're a holy nation. Interesting. But when they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works which they observe. Glorify you because you're such awesome, wonderful, kind people. That when they look at you, they will glorify Jesus Christ. How do we glorify God? By pointing to Jesus Christ. Our Heavenly Father, this morning, you know our hearts, you know our lives, you know